Jurassic World Rebirth is directed by Gareth Evans and stars Scarlett Johansson, Mahershala Ali, Jonathan Bailey, and among others. And this is now the seventh film in the Jurassic Park franchise, and the fourth one in the Jurassic World series after the trilogy that we just had within the last few years. And in this story, it deals with a group of a new team has to go and essentially extract DNA from these mutated dinosaurs after the events that took place from the last films, where the dinosaurs are now coexisting with humans and roaming the earth. And now it's essentially the dinosaur. A lot of the dinosaurs are having to go to secluded islands due to the climate change, to where they can't really roam the earth anymore. And it pretty much goes back to that kind of feel like what we had with the original films, where it's going to more uncharted territory, where our leads are having to go to these undisclosed islands and essentially go to where there was research being done for these mutations. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, growing up as an avid fan of the Jurassic Park series, I can honestly, what can I say about the series? I've done a whole retrospective with Eddie in the past where we talked about all the rest of the movies, and I've been hit and miss when it comes to the sequels. I overall enjoy the franchise, but it really seems like ever since Lost World that we haven't really had much of a great Jurassic Park movie. Probably, at least the closest probably is at least since Jurassic World 1, the first one. But even that one still had its issues despite me enjoying it. And so going into each of the sequels that come out, I always go with just the kind of mindset of, okay, well, it'll probably just be at least entertaining, but I have to realize going into it that it'll never be, as good as the original movies were. And so even though I didn't mind the newer films that came out, I could definitely see why this franchise has been going on for so long, because there was always, trying to keep it going with how big it is successfully at the box office and everything. And, with them also bringing the original cast back in the last film, I didn't mind the last film, but I can definitely see that one strayed very far from a lot of other stuff that, strayed far from the Jurassic Park series. But I still don't mind Dominion and Fallen Kingdom. I just think that they're very, flawed compared to what we've come to expect from these type of sequels. And that's even going the same with 3 and even Jurassic World. So I still feel like, the first one and Lost World are still my favorites of the series. But I still don't mind the rest of the sequels despite some issues. And I even got a chance to finally watch Dominion's extended version the other night, and I got to admit that it was actually an improvement compared the first time compared to the theatrical version. And so my expectations for going into this one were just kind of like we pretty much already gotten the end of the era from the last film, and it's like it feels like it was going to be too soon to make another one. But I still understand why these movies keep getting made and stuff, but I also was curious because it seemed like that they were going to go back into the more like adventurous, horror aspects that I actually do miss from the original series. Like, because when we got it from like Lost World, and even to some extent with Fallen Kingdom, I appreciated the film tries that their movies, some of the movies have tried to still bring back that feel of it. And I do admire Gareth Evans as a director. I think that he's done some really great work, I especially enjoyed Godzilla from 2014, despite some issues with that one, and I also enjoyed The Creator from a couple years ago. So going into it, my expectations were just moderate, but I was still open to see what they did with it. And upon seeing it, I can say that Rebirth does do some things that's slightly better than the last film does, but it also still falls in the same category that we've seen with these sequels as it goes along, and it comes into a lot of problems when it falls with not only writing, but also missing some stuff that you really want to see a lot more with these type of Jurassic Park movies. But to get my pros out of the way, I thought that the cast in this were great. I thought Scarlett Johansson was great as our lead, Zora, and I also really enjoyed her chemistry with her and Mahershala Ali's character, and also Jonathan Bailey. I thought them three alone, they really carried the movie, and I think that each of them have their own dynamic that they're going through and stuff. And what I really appreciate about Ali's character is how he's kind of being on the captain of the boat and everything that he's running and all that, and the way that he's thinking about and his camaraderie that happens with his crew and stuff, how he's very stern. I enjoy his presence always on screen. And then Jonathan Bailey's character I thought was a really good addition, where he's a paleontologist that's kind of similar to what we've had in the past with other characters, especially Dr. Grant stuff. And there's a cool little thing I enjoy also about his character that has a connection to a certain character in the other films that I thought was pretty nice. So that was neat. And then, the rest of the cast, they're fine. I'll get into some of my cons of this later, because I think the biggest distraction to me, it comes into one of the main characters that's in the film that's a really big part of it. that I feel like really takes the movie out for me every time the character really showed up, and it was just such a distraction. But for the most of the cast, I still didn't mind them so much, and the way that the movie is also going back to that type of Uncharted feel, where you're going to these secluded islands and stuff, was not only great with the cinematography, but I really loved the whole island feel. You know, it was giving me vibes very similar to The Lost World, where you're going to the Uncharted territory and having to survive out in the wilderness and go into and surviving the water and things like that. I thought was really great. And the biggest thing out for me the most are definitely the dinosaurs. Like, the dinosaurs steal the show like they usually do in the other films, where you get the Spinosaurus, you get this big mutated one that we see in the trailers that's like a hybrid kind, that's like what they call the D-Rex or whatever. I'll get into a little bit of a con with that later, because I did feel like it was a really big missed opportunity, and I feel like it was very underused, but I still enjoy its presence when it is on screen, and the backstory they do set up with it. Plus, also, on a direction standpoint, I enjoy the fact that they went back to the whole horror aspect in this, because there's moments that feel like it's getting to that kind of like Michael Myers type of vibe that Edwards was going for, where you see stuff happen in the background where there's the dinosaur sneaking up and stuff like that. I thought that was really great filmmaking, and it builds a lot of good suspense in those moments. And there's also some really standout ones, especially there's a part that happens, let's say, that's on a raft or whatever. Not going to go into spoilers, but that was actually a really big. I thought that was really one of the best scenes of the film, and it turned out to actually be an unused idea they had in mind with the original Jurassic Park, because it was from the same writer. And so I thought that was pretty interesting how they were able to finally do something with this one, with that, since they didn't get to use it from the original movie. And then plus also they upped the body count in this, what you come to expect, because there's some parts where you're seeing people getting torn to bits, and the actual stuff we get onto later, especially the climax that involves the D-Rex and everything, was really, it had me on the edge. And there's also some very, there's also some really tenseful moments too, especially this part where they're going down when they're going down this cliff and everything, and having to go down this waterfall area. Like, not only was I on the edge, but if I had seen that in IMAX, I'm a guy that's scared of heights, so seeing that would definitely have me on the edge. And they utilize some other dinosaurs that we kind of expect with, like, the pterodactyls and stuff like that. But I also appreciate that the movie builds into more with how they're trying to evolve with the mutations and everything. Again, I'll get into some of my cons of this, but the way they set the backstory up at the beginning, and then as the movie goes along with it being a straightforward adventure type of vibe, I thought was very well paced and everything. And it also comes in for a good noble cause, as it shows a lot of the ways that the character's motivations come into play later on in the film, especially with Ali's character. And with Scarlett Johansson's, and especially with our three leads and everything. But this is kind of also where I fall into my cons, and before I get into that, I do appreciate also hearing the theme music again, and the visual effects for the dinosaurs. What can I say? They're fantastic as usual, and we've come a long way from seeing a lot of the CGI from the original film, and to this day, the original movie still holds up, and I'm glad to see that each of the films, for the most part, depending on which one you're talking about, they still keep their best to try to keep it very rendered, whether it's CGI or practical. And so, they always look great so they always look great with these movies. And now, to get into some of my cons, I will have to say that unfortunately what the movie does bog down to is that the story itself, I feel like, even though I'm into the whole adventure vibe and the whole, going back to its roots with trying to be a more straightforward type of story, I found myself very, kind of questioning about some of the stuff that they were really building onto, and it was also making me kind of wonder about certain things that they were setting up with, because we get to this backstory that's from the beginning and everything, but I did kind of wonder if it was meant to be like a retcon or something from the other films, because the way they kind of explained it, I'm like, okay, how exactly would they not have known about this as we later on in the film when you think about the other three movies that came by? So I don't know if this movie was meant to ignore the other films, but no, they definitely established that the dinosaurs are still walking the earth. So the other three films did happen, but I just really question the backstory they set up in the beginning about how they set up this whole mutation research facility and stuff, because it really makes you wonder where it was at this whole time between movies. On top of that, one of the things I felt myself very distracted with was this subplot that involves this family that comes into play. And while I didn't mind the father and the two daughters, I found the boyfriend character really annoying, and I thought that he was definitely the worst part of it. And I know that there was a whole arc they give him with everything, that was supposed to come into play, but I felt like this character really should have been cut out completely and was always annoying me every time. And that's another big problem with the movies as well, is that there's a tonal issue. Now, keep in mind, the franchise is known for having other films in the series that did have some annoying characters like Franklin from Fallen Kingdom and, things like that. But even I will admit too, this character in this one may not be as annoying as that one, but it's still almost on the same level, but just just the overall tone it messes with, because you'll have a serious scene from one thing, and then when you're supposed to have something that's like very suspenseful and stuff, and then it's going on where a character is pissing. I felt really took me out of the moment, and it was like on a visual level, it was kind of cool seeing the background and stuff of what the dinosaurs are doing, but when it's supposed to be for comedy, I felt like it kind of takes the seriousness out of it. You know what I mean? And so that scene I feel like could have been executed a lot better. Or you could have really, like I said, you could have really cut this character out completely, because it really was nauseating. And so there's that. And then on top of that, I felt like there was some more they could have done with as far as the D-Rex itself. And while the D-Rex is really cool on screen, and there's some really big stuff that happens later on in the climax, unfortunately it is very short-lived, because we really don't really have much of a payoff. And that's also an issue I had with Jurassic Park 3, because this movie was giving me flashbacks more with that, because we didn't really have much of an impact. I know the movie was going for something different, and I appreciate they weren't trying to rehash the other films, but especially because there are certain dinosaurs that don't really have much of an appearance compared to the rest of the films. But if you're going to go for something more of a different direction, you really want to have a climax that's a lot more impactful. And while the ending itself does hold a big impact to what's to come later and stuff, and while it has a resolvement for our characters and everything, I felt like the way that it just had with the climax itself could have been a lot better. You know what I mean? So that was definitely a missed opportunity with that. On top of that, there's also some, characters that they come in here that are very kind of pointless at times, that I felt, are very been there, done that. And then you also have some human villains that come into play. A lot of the standard stuff that we see with a lot of the other films. And there's also some dumb decisions that you do see that are a couple times I did kind of wonder, like, okay, that could have really been resolved a lot better and easily, and not have to get us in this whole situation. So, but that's more of a problem with the franchise overall than the movie itself, but it still is an issue, don't get me wrong. But overall, though, I still think I still had a fun time with the movie, despite a lot of its issues it had. And while I do find it as a slight improvement from the last one, it's still, unfortunately, is still not as great as the other films. And so with that, I'm going to give it a high average Joe on the Film Freaks meter. And so, for those of you who have also seen Jurassic World Rebirth and also the other films, let me know in the comments of what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.